Well, hello everybody. Once again, it's Frank Fridays with Frank Leone, Ryan's dad. And this is episode number 10, and depending upon how much material I get through, this may be the 10th and final episode, or we may have to extend it one more week. We will find out. But in any event, I just want to say it one last time how appreciative I am of everybody tuning in. I expected when Ryan asked me to do this for him 3 or 4 months ago that maybe 30, 40, 50 people might be watching, and we're approaching 8, 9, 10,000 different people watching every episode. So it's humbling, and it's, I think, a wonderful opportunity for me to share my experiences and perhaps make some sort of impact on somebody. In any event, episode number 9 ended when Ryan had been part of opening the time capsule at his elementary school, had made plans to meet up with his friends later in the day, and asked me to do him a favor and pick him up drive him to pick up a friend and bring them somewhere. So I did, and we went this little parking lot downtown, and there was some woman that he picked up that I hadn't met before, and she sat in the back seat, so I really didn't get much of a look at her, but she seemed like a decent person. And he had me drive them uptown, and Santa Barbara uptown means about a 5 or 6 minute drive, and basically dropped them off at a gas station. I don't know why. It was a Shell gas station up there. There was a sort of this run-of-the-mill old motel across the street. So I did, and Ryan seemed perfectly calm and so forth. It was a Friday, so I have a friend that I often have a glass of wine with, a male friend, Russ, and we went out to our favorite place and had a glass of wine and had our usual chats about life and sports and everything else. And about 6:15, as we were walking out of where we were, I looked and I'd gotten a voicemail from Ryan. So no big deal. I listened to it and I said, "Oh my God!" Ryan's voicemail said, "Hey Dad, I'm in jail and you need to bail me out." And I said, "What in the world is going on?" And somewhere along the line, shortly thereafter, I found out what had happened. That the woman that I had picked up was somebody that was a former addict and had sort of converted over to doing some prostitution work, in a very light sense, not active. And Ryan was basically doing somebody a favor who was looking for something like that and bringing her to a motel. And of course, when he got there, I'm sure he's told the story. There was a room full of agents there that considered this to be a major violation of the law. So in any event, it took me probably till midnight or so to figure out the bail situation. And poor guy had spent enough time in jail. And one thing that was really clear to me is that Ryan had really didn't realize that he was committing a crime. I mean, I think with the situation he was in with the legal problems he'd had in the past, you would realize that there was a target on your back, and that you have to really watch everything you do, and I share that message with him at this moment. But all of that said, he did not, he legitimately was like shocked that this had happened. So he got out, and it was one of those things that this being a little bit different was a state violation, but it's also a violation of your federal paroles. So he was basically facing double jeopardy. So we looked for an attorney. I didn't want to, enough is enough, and I didn't want to get old Bob Sanger involved again with his hefty fees. So we got somebody with a little bit of a more modest fee schedule, and he turned out to be not very good. At first, he looked like he was going to be a godsend. He was a former prosecutor that had gone over to the other side and was a defense attorney now, former prosecutor right in the area. So my, as it turns out, very ill-conceived assumption was that, well, he must know all the prosecutors and he could probably swing a really good deal for Ryan. So we did, but that didn't help as much. But Ryan, meanwhile, while all this was going on, was sober and was trying to do a lot of good things. He was working on his documentary, which since then has really blossomed into something extraordinarily good. He was working on his second book, which I believe is due for release this coming June. He was trying to get his first book optioned out as a movie, And he was getting all sorts of interviews. I'm sure he's told you all this, and things ranging from Penthouse. I know he was interviewed for Playboy, uh, and quite a number of other things. The Huffington Post, Malibu Magazine, Santa Barbara Independent, which is a major newspaper here. He actually was on the cover, not his photo, but The Tortured Life of Ryan Leone was one of the headlines on the cover of this weekly newspaper. But in any event, so he was really doing well. So Ryan's strategy was to try to put off serving time for as long as possible so that he could get as much done as possible before he went in. And indeed, it's not a hard thing to do when you're dealing with the criminal justice system because they tend to move things along very slowly. But Ryan got very, very disillusioned, so did I, with the attorney that we had hired. So we switched to a public defender. And, that did not work out all that well either. Not so much because the public defender was not competent. I think she certainly was. It's just that the load that, in my opinion, the load that public defenders have to carry is so incredibly large that it's hard to give every one of the people that they're representing an appropriate amount of time. So it was a bit of a rough period of time, but we did what we could. And the public defender sort of came along a little bit later when, after he started serving his term, but we were trying to get the best sentence possible. But in any event, so during all of that time, a number of other things happened as well. One is that in May, I believe the date is May the 5th, is the date that Ryan met Karina. And, as much as I speak highly of all the other women that came along, she's the best. And just a stroke of luck, speak of loyal, she's extremely loyal, very fair, a terrific mate for Ryan, and now the mother of his son, and they're partners in life. And he met her on May the 5th. But things got off to a bad start because she was dealing with some significant alcohol issues at the time, and they both went on this major alcohol bender for a couple months. And it was very, very unpleasant. First time, Ryan apparently, when he was roaming around homeless, was doing some alcohol issues, but by and large, it's not something that had been central to Ryan's addiction story. But here it was, almost daily we would find, big empty fifths bottles in the house, and it was just not a good situation at all. And she had a place to live here in Santa Barbara, but he kept on sneaking her in here. And we were saying, that's not right. Here it is 1 a.m. and the dog starts barking and somebody's sneaking in the back door. And so we finally, literally in July of that year, had to get a restraining order, which was something that I didn't want to do, but and I made it clear to her it wasn't anything personal. We just, we wanted to get some sleep. And every night we were, being awoke by all this, plus all the alcohol abuse that was going on was very troubling as well. So we did that. About that time, Karina and Ryan found out that Karina was pregnant with what is now the 20-and-a-half-month-old Nico. And their decision was to have the child. And they also made another decision. And they made a decision to go sober at that very moment. And that was July, I believe it was July of, what would that be, 2017. And Karina has been 100% sober ever since, bless her soul. And Ryan, it took, I believe, a week or two. He was still dabbling a bit, but then he joined the fray as well, and he's been sober ever since as well, as far as I know, at least. But it seems apparent that that's the case. So how interesting that, at least for the last 2.5 years, that sobriety has really been attached to learning that you're about to become, and then after a while you become a parent. So I think that was a very significant moment as well. In any event, at some point in there, just before that, by the way, they entered rehab together back at the South Coast facility. in Orange County, and that made it a number of days, and that didn't work and came back again. But all of that occurred, and then we go into a very tumultuous period of time, late in 2017. It was the middle of November, and Ryan's behavior seemed to be getting a little bit odd, I thought. Somebody was here filming the documentary, in my opinion, a good guy, and he came up to me and says, "My God, I don't know if I can work with Ryan anymore. He's just acting unusual." Karina and Ryan and I went to a Los Angeles Kings NHL hockey game the Saturday afternoon before Thanksgiving, and it was sort of strange. Ryan's behavior at the game was strange. It wasn't necessarily the behavior of an addict. It was, well, he was somebody had thrown up, in the corridor right in front of our seats, and some poor guy had to come and clean it up, and he gave the guy a hard time, which is not anything like Ryan's normal personality. He's actually a very kind-hearted person, and he actually went and spoke to somebody in security that there was problems and so forth and so on. I remember on the way back, he was on the phone with somebody who he's still very good friends with, who served as a sponsor for a while, and somebody in the entertainment industry, an actor of note. And he was on the phone. It was about a 2.25 hour drive back from the Kings game back to Santa Barbara. And Karina and I were in the front, and Ryan was in the back, and he was on the phone the entire time, and basically didn't give the other party more than a couple seconds to speak. In other words, he spoke. He was like totally hyper and spoke for a long period of time. And the next event occurred on Thanksgiving Day. And it was quite an event, and I know I believe Ryan shared this with you in his as well. But we went up to Northern California. Ryan's mom's family is from the Bay Area, and we were actually in Scotts Valley, which is right next to Santa Cruz. Had a wonderful day. Ryan was sort of delusional. He was telling all the cousins, and Ryan's the oldest of 7 cousins, so he's sort of idolized by the 6 younger ones. At this point, they're probably between 15 and 30 years old. But he was telling them things like that he has announced on the internet that he'll fight anybody, for $1 million purse in Las Vegas that'll be given to charity, to prison reform, I believe. And I'm sort of looking and saying, my gosh, it's sort of, what is he thinking? What's going on? But in any event, we start heading back, and it's about a 4-hour drive, and we probably left about 7:30 or so at night. And it was raining, so it was sort of raining and foggy and so forth. So we're starting to drive back, and we're on Route 1, which is at that point, it's sort of a freeway kind of thoroughfare. And Ryan just gets panicked in the back seat and says, "I have some pills in my suitcase. Stop. I have to get some meds. I have to get some pills." He said, "Well, I can't stop here, Ryan." So, but he was really getting panicked. So we got off an exit in a town called Watsonville. And if there's anybody watching from Watsonville, I'm sure there's some very nice parts of Watsonville, but this was not one of them. And we pulled off, and I could hardly see. And Diane was in the car, and we had our lab was in the car, and Ryan and Karina were in the car, and it was raining, and it was foggy, and it was just sort of ugly. And we finally found this little parking lot attached to what appeared to be a little liquor store. And we pulled in there, and Ryan went to the trunk and got whatever pill it was that he felt he needed to take, and almost immediately just sort of lost it, screaming and yelling at me. And this is very unusual, because through it all, through the darkest of dark, and ever since then, Ryan's always been very respectful of me and his mom. A very good son in that respect. But there was something clearly amiss. So he says, "Well, I'm out of here. I'm going to take an Uber back home. Screw you. I'm gone." And yelled to Karina, "Come on, out of the car. We're going." And she wouldn't do it. She was looking and saying, "My God, he's acting crazy. I'm not going to get out of the car." So he just leaves. And this is in the middle of nowhere. Just goes walking away somewhere. So all we could do is say, "Well, we better stay right here, because if we leave, then he really is stuck. This way he may have a second thought and come back." And we get a phone call minutes later from one of the cousins, the oldest one, from the house back in Scotts Valley saying, what's going on? Ryan just called us on his cell phone and asked me to come pick him up in Watsonville. And I said, well, here's what's going on. And somehow we got Ryan and the cousin and Ryan's uncle Ron, and we were on the speaker in the car. We were all on at the same time, trying to coax reason into him to come back. He finally came back, and I said, look, one thing we got to do now, nobody in this car is going to say another word until we get back to Santa Barbara, probably 3.5 more hours. It was probably approaching 9 o'clock on Thanksgiving night at that point. So we did get him back, and they got out of the car and went where they were staying. They were staying with his friend Jeff at his place elsewhere here in Santa Barbara. But in any event, that is what happened on Thanksgiving. So we knew something was wrong. The next day, I believe it was the next day, somebody called my attention to a posting that Ryan had done on Facebook, which basically showed a person out of control. It was basically a video selfie where he was talking about the government is out to get him because of his dedication to prison reform, and somebody's got to help him. And but it was really an out of control moment. So we realized that something had to be done quickly. So the very next night, Saturday night, one of his good friends and his good friend's wife, Max, and I don't recall her name right now, Karina, Diane, and I, the five of us, basically sat and met from about 4 to about 8 p.m. at our house and said, we have to do something. He could die any minute. This is really, something is out of control here. We didn't know what it was. A bit later, what we basically learned was that he, like an addict that's being tested by probation all the time would be wont to do, is doing other things to get high, to get legal highs, and basically stimulants. He was drinking an awful lot of coffee. He was doing power drinks excessively. My understanding, he was taking a lot of Xanax, like they were M&Ms, and he was smoking marijuana, which in and of and by itself is small potatoes compared to everything else, but perhaps doing it much too much, having some real insomnia issues, and just having real ups and downs, and then some degree of what I would have thought would have been some degree of psychosis there, which is a very frightening condition. So we apparently there's an intervention that you can do, but you have to go through the police department, and they can pick up, and there's a number for it. I don't know what the number, I don't recall what the number is, but we got in touch with them, and his friend Max, who had been through things like this before, knew exactly who to call and what to say, and we got the police to track him down, and they finally did. They just spoke. I don't think they actually got to him face to face. I think they found a way to speak to him on the phone. Maybe there was a little face to face, but Ryan was able to convince them that he was perfectly okay and did not have to be taken in. So it's like, oh my gosh, all of this, and it leads to nothing. So that was that day, and a few more days go by, and about 3 in the morning, our doorbell rings, and it's Ryan at the door, and I say, well, this can't be a good thing, and he really seems out of control again, and basically says, I need some of my meds, and I need $10 for gas. I'm going to Mexico. And I said, you need more than $10 to get from here to Mexico, Ryan. But I mean, at this point, he was so paranoid that people were out to get him that he wanted to leave the country. And also, he knew that he had a date, an incarceration date that was probably coming up pretty quickly. So I gave him the $10, and I gave him a pill, and I figured, I don't want to make this any worse. But also, he said, I've broken up with Karina. I took her cell phone. Screw her. I'm out of here. So I said, oh my God. So we couldn't even call Karina. So Ryan leaves. It's 3:15, 3:20, 3:30 in the morning. We go over to the place where they're staying. She can't get in touch with us because she doesn't have her cell phone, but she's up. She's concerned. She's worried. So we basically spend hours doing all sorts of things to try to protect things, to try to protect her assets by draining them from the bank account, trying to find Ryan somewhere. And actually, I think we did at one point that morning. I don't recall exactly how. And got a police officer to go track him down. And just before this, some days before this, his probation officer, as they do, had come to our house unannounced to check up on him about 7 in the morning, and he wasn't here. And you know, he asked if Ryan was staying here, and which we were supposed to be staying in our house, and I said no, he's not. And Ryan subsequently got very upset with me, but I basically told Ryan, listen, I'm not going to lie to the law in your behalf. I have to tell them the truth. So I did. So meanwhile, a warrant was out for Ryan's arrest, which was coming out. I don't think it was out when the intervention occurred, but it was out when this police officer went down and I believe found Ryan near the beach somewhere. I don't know how we were able to do that, but somehow we found out where he was. But once again, the officer did not pick Ryan up, so we were stuck there as well. So you know what to do? Well, we finally got to the infamous night of December 1st, 2017. Ryan had some guys in town. One guy was a former inmate friend of his from Wisconsin, just a great guy named Brent, and hopefully they'll stay friends over the years, who I had corresponded with, spoken on the phone, but had never met. He was in town, but at this point, when we went to Karina's house, or Ryan and Karina's place to pick up Karina, I noticed that there was vials of different meds there, but in particular the Xanax was there. And I just took them, I confiscated them, and got the message out, Ryan, if you want these, we'll give you these one a day, but you're not going to have access to a whole vial of them. So we had them at our house. So Ryan was panicked and said, I got to get my meds back, and I wouldn't do it. So Ryan said, well, Dad, and he was irrational at this point. So Ryan said, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to call the police on you. You know, you can't do that. You can't withhold my medications. So he called the police, and I'm thinking, well, go ahead and call the police. I'm sure the police will be very happy to meet up with you. And as far as Diane and I are concerned, as sad as it would be, we knew he had to go in, and best he goes in right away, then we have to spend every hour worrying what's going to happen to Ryan after that. So in any event, Ryan waited for a long time. The police came, and sure enough, and this is like 11 o'clock, 11:30 at night on a Friday night. It's a very quiet residential street that we live on. And the police car comes up, and I go walking out, and Ryan's basically said, well, here he is. You know, I want my meds back. And they immediately just grab his arms and cuff him and throw him in the police cruiser. And he's screaming, yelling, you know, they're brutalizing me. Somebody help me. Somebody help me. We have a neighbor across the street named Joey, and he had seen her a short time before outside the house and say, Joey, please help me. But in any event, Ryan was carted off to the Santa Barbara County Jail, and this was really the start of the clock for his incarceration time for the pimping and pandering charge that had occurred. And it was a very tough transition for Ryan. I will admit that when we went to bed that night, there was a great sense of relief that he was out of harm's way. And you hear that a lot when loved ones of family members who are in addiction phases are actually brought to a safe place and they're out of harm's way. They're going from one pretty terrible thing to another terrible thing, but the lesser of the evils was being incarcerated. But in any event, apparently Ryan had a fairly difficult transition at that time. Because he was still very much dependent upon this variety of things that he was on. And he was still behaving strangely. So we had a series of court dates that started shortly thereafter, and Karina and Diane and I were regulars in the courthouse, and the public defender started to get her involvement in, but it was just so disorganized because she had so much on her docket that it was sort of painful. But on the other hand, I mean, you know, what are we going to do? But the issue at this time was what's going to happen here? You know, he may have to serve a couple years federal and a couple years of state back to back, even as long as his previous thing for this basically crazy decision to help out somebody that was looking for a prostitute. So we were, you know, it took a number of months before that ultimately got resolved. But during this period of time, Ryan was improving, but he was still in Santa Barbara County Jail, which is an awful place to be. It's not nearly as hospitable as being even in the worst of federal facilities. And we did go visit him Christmas, and it's so unpleasant. It was Ryan and Karina and myself, and we had to talk to him on a telephone on the other side of a glass pane, and I think we had a total of 30 minutes between us. So that was really, really hard. And then the months go by, and he goes to a couple other places, and then finally gets a sentence which is concurrent, fortunately, which is what we were hoping for all along. So it basically reduces time to what ultimately turned out to be 16 months. Still an unpleasantly long time, but not multiple years, fortunately. While all this was going on, April the 9th of 2018, Ryan's blessed son, Nico, came into the world right here at Cottage Hospital in Santa Barbara. And I went over that morning and saw our first and only grandchild, and Karina was there, and how sad it was that Ryan missed the childbirth of his child. But a couple months later, we took a ride over to Victorville, about 2 hours and 45 minutes each way, with the baby and Karina and me and Diane. And we probably had about 3 hours to visit with Ryan. And my plan was that the first hour we'd all be there, and then Diane and I would go out and have a long lunch somewhere so that Ryan and Karina and Nico could be together for a couple hours. And indeed, that was the only time that Ryan saw Nico during that first period in prison. By the time Ryan got out, Nico was almost turning 1, so only one time during that first year. But the heartwarming moment was when he walked out and saw his son for the first time. He's often said that was one of the most incredible moments of his life, and for his parents, it was an incredible moment for watching him have that incredible moment. So that meant a lot, and I might add, he's a fantastic father to Nico, as Karina is a fantastic mother. So in any event, and he left there, and I think he went to the San Bernardino County Jail for a while, and then ultimately to Imperial County, which is down right on the Mexican-San Diego County border, not the Mexican border down there. And he finally got out on March the 25th. Now, I'm recording this on December 27th, so it's basically just 9 months ago that Ryan got out, and the last 9 months have been extremely special. He's doing great. He's doing wonderful things professionally. The real Ryan is back. He's a great father, he's a good partner, and he's a great son. So all is well right now, and we realize everything is one day at a time, and there's a basic lesson there to just put your arms around every day and enjoy the present. Don't spend too much time worrying about the future. So I want to conclude over a couple minutes here with what I've really learned as a result of these 19 years. It'll be 20 years next September that we've had to deal with all these machinations that we have dealt with. And the first is that it was not about me, it was not about Diane, it was about Ryan. It wasn't about the pain that I was enduring. It was my feeling so genuinely sad that Ryan had to go through all this. Because at the end of the day, it is really a disease, it's not a crime. And that's the hardest part of things. But I've also learned that you can't control this. Remember the 3 C's of al-anon that I shared in episode 5? You didn't cause it, you can't control it, and you can't cure it. And that is so true. So you attain a certain amount of peace, and you learn to create a balance between knowing what you can control and what you cannot control. And that's been a real lesson for me as well. The third thing is that I never lost faith in Ryan, not for a second. I believed all along, I never let go of it, that he was going to turn out just fine, that he was going to have a great life when all is said and done, and that he is at heart a really good person. I never wavered from that. I don't think it says as much about me as it says about him. But that was another important thing. I think it brought us much closer. In fact, I think this process of doing these 10 episodes have brought us closer. He's really hearing it from his father, like his father saw it during all of these years. But it brought us closer as well. And one of the reasons it brought us closer is that during all these years, I have written him hundreds upon hundreds of letters. And in almost every one of those letters, there would be a paragraph or two about meaningful things. And you just don't talk at that level with an offspring that when things are going well, when you're seeing them all the time and you're talking about all of life's successes rather than all of life's harsh lessons, but also try to instill a degree of optimism in them. And then I think the final thing that I want to share is what I've shared with Ryan since day one, what is important to me in my life, and what I hope that everybody who's listening and watching me speak right now will bear in mind as well. And I've said it before, that the two things that I've asked from Ryan as a son, as a person, is to be happy, to enjoy your life each and every day. That every minute of worry or concern or unhappiness is 60 seconds that you've lost where you could really enjoy yourself and enjoy life. And the second part is to be a good citizen. And by good citizen, I mean to go out and really make a difference in the world, to help other people less fortunate than you. And I lost both of my parents at an old, ripe age, 26, 27 years ago, respectively. And after all these years, there's two lessons that I take from them. My mother was just a happy warrior. She laughed and joked and just loved life. And, she passed that down to me. And my father was the ultimate advocate of the underdog. I'd be watching a ball game and he'd walk in and say, "Who's playing?" And I'd tell him, it's the Rams and 49ers. And he'd say, "Who's the underdog?" I'd say, "It's the Rams." He says, "Well, I'm for the Rams." And he sat and watched and rooted for the Rams. But he was that way in every respect of his life as well. And I think I inherited that. I know that I certainly have taken in a lot of people that have been underdogs. They've been outcasts in society, but they've been some of the best friends that I've ever had in my life. And I'm confident that Ryan is going to live his life in the spirit of happiness and serving others. And I'm confident that Nico, his son, will as well. And hopefully the message is resonating with somebody or other out there somewhere that's watching this sometime, someday, in some place. So again, my thanks to everybody for your kindness, for your extraordinarily kind comments to all of these sessions. Going forward, Ryan's talking about maybe doing a joint live presentation with me, and if he wants to do that, I'm good with that. Some people have suggested maybe doing a book that's drawn largely from what's been shared during these episodes, or maybe a joint book between me and Ryan. I've written a couple books, and I'd be willing to entertain that as well. So you probably haven't seen the last of me, but that said, thank you very, very much, and good luck to everybody. You're a wonderful, wonderful group to be speaking with. Okay? Thank you very much.
Palabra.